For those of you who don't know, Tom and I work on, and Scott and various other people around here work on the Fretboard Journal magazine, which is published just 20 minutes west of here over in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. And one of the things we pride ourselves on, in addition to being one of the last surviving glossy print magazines that covers bluegrass and Americana music and roots music, is going after guys like Brian Sutton or Kenny Smith or David Grisman and interviewing them. And in the course of our conversations that we run in the magazine, we of course end up talking about vintage instruments. And so this is sort of thanks to Wintergrass and the Wintergrass community and some of the great collectors around here, Steve Swan, Jim Brown, Mark Demaray, who's going to be talking in a minute, and various others I'm forgetting. We're able to kind of gather up as many cool instruments as we can that are going to be at the festival, and then hopefully foist them upon two great musicians like Eli West and Kenny Smith this year, and just see what happens, and hopefully get some discourse and some cool conversations, and of course some great music out of these guitars. So hope everybody enjoys it. Thank you. Tom thanks you as well, and have some fun.
Hi, I'm Mark Demaray, helping out with this workshop again this year, and we really owe a lot of thanks to Wintergrass for letting us do it every year. And this year in particular, it's kind of a labor of love. There's a lot of folks that bring their guitars around, and it's a pretty big task to get them all together in one room at one time. Steve Swan is here, Bill Clemens from Rosewood Guitar, and the artists who come out here, Jim Brown from Jet City Guitar. They bring a lot of really cool instruments for everybody to see and play. We hear about all these legendary Martins and Gibsons and don't always get a chance to look at them in the flesh, so that's what we're doing today. And we're going to do it a little bit different this year and take a trip through time, and I'm going to assign these guys, at least at first, the instruments that they're going to start out with. So the first two are an 1885 Martin Single 028 and an 1896 Martin Single 028. So when in the day, and in our trip through time, in the early days of music in this era, there weren't that many phonographs even available for recorded music. When you went to the music store to buy music, you bought sheet music, and if you wanted to listen to music, you had to learn how to play it. It was really before the first commercial radio broadcast was 1920, so this was really in the earlier days. And many of these early ones weren't even really designed for steel strings. Those came a little bit later. So we're starting off then with 1895, 1896, before turn of the century, Martin 028. So they're rosewood, Brazilian rosewood in those days, sides and back, and a red spruce or Adirondack spruce top. And we owe a lot of thanks to these two artists who come. They're pretty busy with other stuff, and they come, don't get paid extra for doing this for us, so we really appreciate them coming out and showing.
What's neat about these old ones for me is the getting to play on bar frets, which is you have to kind of adjust. So it's just a straight bar, and it's the profile's straight, so you can't really when your strings go over, it's kind of like speed bumps if you dig in too far. So you have to really. I don't know if I'm sure Eli was the same way. You kind of have to really lighten up your touch, but I really like playing the bar frets on the things. It's really neat.
Yeah.
So a lot of the features of guitars change for those of us who are kind of geeky about it. Kenny was describing the bar frets. The frets are just a square or oblong bar rather than the T with the tangs on it that comes nowadays. And they really didn't come out with the T frets till later into almost the 20s. Now we're moving up a few years to Kenny's got a 1907 Gibson L1. It was one of the first guitars that has a carved top. And then Eli has a little bit later a Gibson A2 mandolin. In the turn of the century, 1900 to 1910 range, mandolin orchestras were just kind of a rage. Almost every city had one. Gibson sold a ton of mandolins that looked just like that. And then they had to have some backup and rhythm with them and such, so a lot of the guitar players came in. And they had, it was just like the violin and the viola and the cello and all that. They had the mandolin, the mandola, the mandocello, and even the mando bass. So almost every city had that. It was a very popular thing. Started to lose some popularity into the 20s, but at this point in time, this guitar would have likely been played in a mandolin orchestra as one of the backups, and again, a bit of a carved top that kind of went along with the same mandolin. Mandolins are a challenge in this workshop because they're tough to tune, but
We're being
get
very
close.
specific and not using tuners as well.
So we're talking about, again, early 1900s for the mandolin orchestra time period.
I wasn't planning on singing this early, but we'll do one I heard Doc and Dog do. It's called All About You. I heard the daffodil, I heard the whippoorwill, just how pretty your smile. Yes, I told them all about you. I told the little bird every single word that you say was worthwhile. Yes, I told them all about you. I told the moon and all the pretty stars that shine above about the way you roll your pretty eyes and how you love. Each little honeybee knows there's gonna be a honeymoon for two. Yes, I told them all about you. I told the whippoorwill just how pretty your smile. Yes, I told them all about you. I told the little bird every single word that you say was worthwhile. Yes, I told them all about you. I told the moon and all the pretty stars that shine above about the way you roll your pretty eyes and how you look. Each little honeybee knows there's gonna be a honeymoon for two. Yes, I told them all about you. Stars that shine above about the way you roll your pretty eyes and how you look. Each little honeybee knows there's gonna be a honeymoon for two. Yes, I told them all about you. Yes, I told them all about you. Does it count if I tune it after the song? What a great mandolin.
So we went from when the mandolin orchestras were really in their heyday and the guitar was having a difficult time being heard, there was kind of a need to find a little bit louder guitar that would come through. And what we call cut. You couldn't really hear it over the mandolins and stuff. So in that era, the biggest musical instrument distributor they claimed in the world was a company called Lyon and Healy. And they sold tons of guitars, Washburn and Lyon and Healy and many other brands. And they came out with really what was the first cataloged large body steel string guitar. Before that, most of these were still gut string and didn't have the volume to cut through with the big mandolin orchestras. So they came out, and I think the first catalog known was 1912 with a model they called the Lakeside Jumbo. And again, many people have alleged that it was really the first steel string dreadnought large body style type guitar. Now Martin celebrated their 100th anniversary of the dreadnought last year. 1916 was when John Dykman and Frank Martin developed the actual dreadnought as we know it in the Martin form. It looked a little bit more, those early ones looked a little bit more, well, we'll have some examples later, a little bit more slope-shouldered on them, and they were still 12-fret instruments. So it took, for many years, those of us who have an interest in some of the Lyon and Healy and Washburn history and background, we couldn't find an actual Lakeside Jumbo guitar to choose from or to actually measure in the flesh. We just had the catalog descriptions. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I found the one that Kenny has, which is branded inside as a Lakeside Jumbo, and the serial number dates it to 1909. So the story at Martin was that a guy named Harry Hunt from the Ditson Company walked into the Martin factory in 1916, and they were a Lyon and Healy distributor, so they had probably sold these and known about them, and they said to Mr. Martin, why don't you make me some of these? We're one of your biggest customers, and that was really the birth of the true dreadnought from Martin as we know it. But these predated that by some 7 or 8 years. So this was the only known example for a while, and then I'll just tell a quick story. I have a cousin that's been in the music business for a long time. He lived in Seattle about 20 years ago, and I kept asking my help about identifying this guitar he had at his mom's house in Michigan under the bed because there was no branding on it. He didn't know what it was. And finally, he came to town last year, and he said, I'm going by there on my way home to London. Let me send you some pictures of the guitar under my bed so you can help me identify what it is. It turned out it's the one that Eli's holding. It doesn't say Lakeside Jumbo on it, but you can tell they're identical guitars. So really the only 2 known examples of this guitar that have surfaced so far are right here in front of you with these 2 guys playing them. Now, in those days, again, it's a 12-fret dreadnought. If you guys hold up the back and the sides of them, it looks like, what we would think really cool old Brazilian rosewood. In fact, there was a series of artisans that did grain painting on wood. These back and sides are made of birch, and they're painted to look like rosewood grain. Even up close, you can hardly tell. But that's how I don't know why they use birch. Rosewood was pretty expensive even in those days. But anyway, the only two known Lakeside Jumbo 12 fret early large body steel string guitars.
Mark doesn't know this, but this is actually an auction. I like this format. Last year, we had to go shopping for instruments, and there was kind of an awkward 4 minutes between songs, and somebody cued elevator music to play while we were shopping for guitar. So I like this. We both have these closed style tuners, and they can barely fit around these necks. They're so giant.
It's a big V-neck, and there's no metal rod in the neck. So most guitars, especially these days, have some kind of a metal reinforcing rod in the neck because you can see all that pressure. The strings would kind of bend the neck up after a while, and so but these are pretty fragile, really, thinner tops and whatnot. And I didn't give a plug for D'Addario. They sent us a whole bunch of strings to retune these things and get them sounding their best. So we've spent the last week stringing up guitars for all this stuff so you guys can hear them. But we put some of their newer bronze strings on this one. They sound pretty good.
Yeah, these guitars are really alive. Man, they really respond.
You know, one of them is, and one of them has the very early T frets. They're very small. I mean, if we were, the one that Eli had is like completely original bridge, original frets, everything. And we didn't really want to touch it. The frets are pretty small, not what we're used to nowadays, so it's a little harder. And, you know, I think we've said this in years past, but you have to give these guys credit playing these things. Every neck is so different. For those of you who struggle to play guitar like I do, it's hard to get the notes and find the right strings anyway when you have different string spacing and different gauges and different necks. It's a difficult one.
One of the things, too, that, I mean, the last two guitars didn't have fret markers, so if you hear some new licks.
Yeah. See, on the side binding here, they have dots on most guitars, so you can see where the frets are when you're playing it, and some of those don't, so it's a little more blind. You guys can switch off here. I don't care which one plays which, but now those two were really the first steel string large bodies to be heard through the Mandolin Orchestra, but then the Mandolin Orchestras kind of died off, and suddenly all the mandolins went away, and people got into banjos in the Roaring 20s, and guitars really turned more to some experimental things and more what we would think of as parlor guitars. So again, back to the Lyon and Healy company, which was really the monster in those days. They had a couple of brands. One of their most famous ones was the Washburn brand, and that's what these two are. They're Lyon and Healy era, 1924, 25. The one that Eli has is what they commonly call the bell guitar. There wasn't very many of those made. Carl Sandburg, the poet, had one of each, a mahogany and a rosewood one. He really liked that one. And the more famous one, and the reason that I was interested in this model, I grew up as a huge fan of Walt Disney's Davy Crockett. And Fess Parker recorded the Ballad of Davy Crockett on one of those bell guitars. There's only about 5 known to exist in rosewood like that one. But that was the one he had. You can find it on YouTube with him in the Disney studios singing the Ballad of Davy Crockett on the bell guitar. Again, these are 12 frets. The one that Kenny has was the high-end Washburn at the time. It has that gold decal applique on there rather than putting some of the pearly stuff on it like Martin did. It has a pearl inlay in the headstock and whatnot, but the tuners were gold with pearl buttons, and this guitar is, some of the Pearly Martins had those same tuners on it, and as those guitar aficionados and collectors know, sometimes the tuners are worth as much or more than the guitars. This is one of those examples where they came on. The people that are restoring Pearly Martins from the 20s want those kind of tuners on there too. So again, this is once again they're both likely Brazilian. At least this one is Brazilian. The one Eli has maybe Indian in those days. They started mixing them up. They didn't make as much distinction in those days between Indian rosewood, Guatemalan rosewood, or Brazilian.
The finish checking looks like alligator skin.
It does, yeah. That one sat in too much moisture at one point in its life, and the finish got all checked on it and such. This one's in a little better shape and stuff. But this was their high-end model called a Style 8 or a Model 5238.
This one's got a nice little, looks like a ducktail on the,
Yeah.
which is,
We call that the volute or the dart in the Martins, and oftentimes it was like just a little detail they did when carving them and stuff. And these both have kind of the same dovetail neck joint. Still no real reinforcing rod in the 12 fret neck in either of these two.
They really nailed the fake rosewood paint job on this one.
Yeah, that's actually real rosewood, but yeah, exactly. Anyway, so and again, this was just post Mandolin Orchestra dying off. Still a lot of banjos around. People went back to playing these kind of in the parlors in the 20s. Radio was just about to start when these hit, and we had a lot of radio stars and music that will come up in the next era to talk about. So, by the way, I thank these guys again for performing. They all both have some of their CDs out here afterwards. Come up and talk to them and support these guys for coming out and playing these great old guitars for us.
And another hand for whoever changed all the strings on these guitars.
That guitar rings like a
Like a bell. And if you think Billy and the Lowground was a little odd on parlor guitars, it was really a Civil War era song, so it was perfectly appropriate time-wise for,
Totally
even though we
talked
usually
about
played on.
How about Kenny Smith? Man.
The OM,
Eli West.
OMs, they're over here. There they are. Right there. Yeah.
We met last night, I guess about, when was it, 8 o'clock, I guess. First time we'd met each other. And been hearing about Eli for a long time, but never got to pick a tune with him. And it's been a great day so far.
So now we're going to move ahead to just kind of post-Depression era. We probably could take this tag off for you so it doesn't get in your way. Yeah, Minnie Pearl.
So glad to be
We have a, I think it's a 31 OM28, that's the Rosewood model. These are both Martins. And a 33 OM18, so the mahogany style. When the kind of roaring 20s died off and the banjo music started losing popularity, joke now, I guess, for the banjo players, we had all those banjo players that were used to playing a much longer neck. So a guy named Perry Bechtel came into Martin and said, you know, he was a great banjo player, very well known. I wanted to start playing guitar more because that was the popular music of the day. And so he asked Martins to put a 14 fret neck on their triple O body style. And so the really first 14 fret Martin guitar came about in that 1929, 1930, 1931 era when these two were made in Martin's factory. If any of you, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to near the Philadelphia area and go to the Martin factory and take their tour, it's rated one of the best tours in the country. It's free, and they take you all through the factory, and they're in this new factory they moved to in 1964, but you can also go into the old factory that was there from the 1800s out on North Street. They call it the old North Street factory. It's still there. They sell their used parts and stuff out of there. It's a great history. I mean, I had a great time there. Been there a couple of times. You should really do it. So Martin made these then, and Martin's standard thing was, an 18 series was made out of mahogany. The 28 series was made out of rosewood. They still in that era had Adirondack or red spruce, sometimes called eastern spruce tops on them. And now we started getting into, again, the 14 frets. I think in this era, they still most of the time had an ebony reinforcing rod in the neck. So the neck still needed something to help it keep from bending. But in those early days, they did what was done in the days before that, and they took a long kind of strip of ebony, cross grain, and routed a hole right under the fingerboard of the neck, and they glued that in. So it was a laminated piece of wood. And we'll see in the next couple series of guitars, they decided with the 14 fret bigger bodies like this, that wasn't working so well, and the necks were kind of warping a little bit. Martin has always had a lifetime warranty for the original owner, so they didn't like the guitars coming back and having to do work on them. So as they progressed up through the golden age of the 30s, they changed some of the features. So these would again be the OM, which is what they call the orchestra models, what that stands for. Later became just a triple O body size, and the mahogany 18 and the rosewood 28. You guys ready? Okay.
Really quick, if you're here for the yoga class, you're late. But namaste anyway. I'm going to sing a tune I wrote called A Brick in the Road. Here's a brick in the road. It's got something to do with the way that I choose to get over you. Here's a brick in the road that can love and can hate. Here's a brick in the road. It's got something to do with the way that I choose to get over you. If I wanted a house, I'd fell a big fir, mill the memories I made for the next ones to learn. Here's a brick in the road. It's got something to do with the way that I choose to get over you. But the big bricks stick around, thrown around in D.C. Save the bricks for the road and for under your feet. Here's a brick in the road. It's got something to do with the way that I choose to get over you. A really big departure in the neck profile. I feel like it was a lot more work for those previous guitars for my left hand anyway. And
Some of the early ones of these had the other style banjo tuners on them, where it's like a banjo, where it tunes differently. These were more of the kind of standard Grover type. So now we're moving into the, can you hold this for a second? To the golden era with dreadnoughts, where the dreadnought was really, as we know it today, was and probably the most copied style of guitar. Was this one. These are 1935 D18s. I think, 7 serial numbers apart, Steve? Yeah, so they were on the workbench at the same time in 1935 in Nazareth at Martin's factory. Now we move into really T frets by 35, and now they have a steel reinforcing bar in the neck. Some people thought Martin used it from a flexible flyer sled. It just looks like it's a 1/2-inch T made out of steel. It's actually not from the sleds, I don't think, because it was manufactured pretty squared up. So they just routed a groove in the neck under the fingerboard to put this steel in there, and then glued the fingerboard on, and that really held the neck better than the early ebony rods. And many people, myself included, I'm a big believer in the steel T-bar, really accentuating the sound as you finger it. I think the sound transmits down that steel better into the body and a little bit bigger sound. These are really the next grouping is like 35, 36, 37 dreadnoughts from Martin, which is again kind of the golden era, really for our genre, the bluegrass genre, the most sought after guitar and really pretty much the coolest thing. So these are, again, 7 serial numbers apart, sitting on the workbench at the same time in 1935, D18s.
is this one from Steve?
Yeah, both of them are Steve's, actually. Any more to the story on these, Steve? Different owners, just he happened to strike lightning at the same time, so.
These days you pay extra for all of this wear too.
And, those of you who don't know it, just as a lesson for anybody in the audience, even though the finish is pretty well worn on those, if you sand it down and put a nice shiny finish on it, it loses about 75% of its value. So you don't ever touch. It's kind of like some of the old other instruments and furniture and whatnot. The original finish, just as it came out of Nazareth, no matter how bad a shape it's in, is always the preferred deal. So if you happen to run into your relative's old Martin in the attic and want to shine it up and refinish it, please don't.
Just getting into my my main guitar I played, I guess, since '95 has been a 1935 D18. I've got two of these. One I've had since '95, and one I recently bought the last couple of years. And I think my serial number on my second one is pretty close to these. It's a 5.9. I think it might be a 500 number, and I think that's what these are. And these are neat because they have the stamp in the back plus the decal, which is, I think, mid 35 or later 35. You'll see some 35s that don't have the stamp, and I'm not sure what that number is. My main guitar, it's a 60637, and it has the stamp, so I know it's sometime after that.
It's funny, this one serial number has a money sign and then 39,500.
Now, they're talking, most of you maybe know this, but they're talking about the serial numbers. Martin was, they were from Germany. In fact, I think there was nobody that spoke English on the factory floor till the 20s. And they numbered everything. So they started stamping the serial numbers on. You can tell exactly when your Martin was made. In fact, there's a guy now that has access to the records. He'll tell you the day it was stamped and the day it was approved for shipment out of the factory to the day, with the records that the Martin family, it's still, sixth generation, I think, still runs the business. They kept all the records in the old family home, which is right next to the old factory. So it's kind of a fun history thing. That's one of the attractions, at least for many people on the Martins, is the history is available.
Caleb was talking about serial numbers. Caleb Smith was on his Facebook. He's a builder from North Carolina, but he had wrote on his Facebook about 2 weeks ago. He said, "Hey, you ever look up your serial number as a zip code, for the pre-war?" So mine was downtown Chicago, is where mine. It was on the west end of Chicago. Is where so these are 5.9. I'm not sure where the 5.9 are going to be, but the 60637 is downtown Chicago zip code. So that's fun if you got an old guitar, look up as a zip code, and it's pretty neat. So. If you're busy like me, you don't have time to do that kind of stuff. So. First heard this song from Bob Wills. It's one called "Goodbye, Eliza Jane." Yeah.
It's funny, these tuners, even though they're not the banjo tuners, they feel like they're almost one-to-one. You got to be really careful with these. They're geared, but they're really touchy. FYI. Sure thing.
Yeah, they were 6-to-1 ratio in that one, and it was really tough. They went to kind of 12-to-1 after that a little bit. So now we're staying with the golden age. We have a 37 D28 and a 36 D18. This is kind of the really sweet spot, and for those that people are really interested in old Martins, these are the two, probably the best years. T-bar, still T-bar neck, still on T-frets. No popsicle brace yet in the, is that correct? Yeah. So this was still kind of the early days of steel strings, and people started using a little bit heavier strings. So that over the years, in the late 30s, they started having a few warranty problems and cracks. There's some crack, not on this guitar, but some cracks formed along the neck here, and so they started gluing in a little bit later what we commonly call a popsicle brace. It looks like a great big tongue depressor. They glued it across grain in the top bout there to kind of help keep from cracking, and then through 36 and 37 that brace was not there. Many people think that allows the top to vibrate more freely and is a much more open sound and is really the most desired. So even though this is a little bit of a repeat of the 35 D18s, it's too, we can't really ignore having a 37 D28 and a 36 D18 on stage. So, and again, the 28 is the Brazilian rosewood, the 18 is the mahogany. Otherwise, 14 fret dreads, pretty much the same guitar. Other than, of course, the 28 style had the herringbone trim. People call them a herringbone all the time for short, and that's a reference to the herringbone trim on the style 28 guitars. The 18s did not have that trim, and we'll show you kind of where the herringbone ended later in the 40s when they ran out of the supply. So 37 D28 and 36 D18.
It's really tricky, like Mark was saying about building guitars. I mean, anybody that builds guitars, you've got all these different species of wood, and so on that deal about the cracks on the top, you have a ebony, which is it attracts moisture and releases moisture at a different rate than the spruce top does. So you got two different woods that's bonded together, and one of them reacts different. So it's really tricky on these guitars. Even the pick guard is made out of, the celluloid back then. So it tends to shrink all the time, but the top doesn't shrink. So you got all these different forces on a guitar like this. So it's amazing that some of these guitars that's still surviving after all these years. It's amazing. And the caretakers. So I think Eli's got a tune that this is the Leuven Brothers, I think.
I heard it from the Leuvens, yeah. It's not even 11, but we're going to do a murder ballad. Hope that's okay.
Always heard this story. Bill Monroe was talking about Ira was on the Opry one night, and I always heard this story that Bill was on stage listening to Ira, and he was listening to Ira, and he said, "There's only one other man that could sing that high." He's talking about Ira, and he really liked Ira's singing.
This is an aside, but I recently watched a video of, that tune, Watson's Blues? A really cool tune that Bill Monroe wrote for Doc, and he's introducing it. It's a YouTube. You can look it up, and he spends about 30 seconds talking about how great a guitar player Doc is. He's like, all right, let's do the tune. And they play a tune, and he doesn't let Doc take a solo in the song he wrote for him. He talks about how great a guitar player is, but he's like, no, you're not going to take a solo. This is Katie Deer. mama. You can be a bride of mine. If she says yes, come back and tell me. If she says no, run away. Oh, Willie dear, there's no use in asking. She's in her room, taking rest, and by her side is a golden dagger. Slay the one that I love best. Oh, Katie dear, go ask your papa if you can be a bride of mine. If he says yes, come back and tell me. If he says no, run away. Oh, Willie dear, there's no use in asking. He's in his room, taking rest, and by his side is a silver dagger to slay the one that I love best. So he picked up that silver dagger and stove it through his jealous heart, saying goodbye, Katie, goodbye, darling. The time has come for us to part. And she picked up that bloody dagger and stove it through her lily white breast, saying goodbye, mama, goodbye, papa. I'll die with the one that I love best.
It's one of our more tender numbers.
Also, realizing this workshop's 2 hours long, we're taking note of whoever's leaving. There's a camera set up back there, so you're here for the whole 2 hours. I hope you know that.
Yeah, I think that is one.
So these two, we're going to mix it up a little bit and talk about in the 30s, the radio shows were really big. The Chicago Barn Dance, the Hayloft Gang, they called them, the Grand Ole Opry, Louisiana Hayride. They had radio stations many times, and that's how the Carter family really got their start, was on the radio. They called it a border station because the radio station was just across the border in Mexico. So they blasted out with something like 500,000 watts, and it The reason the FCC cut down on how many watts you could broadcast with the radios in those days is they would take over the channel. You couldn't hear anything else but those guys. So it was hugely popular. People would sit around the radio in the 30s and listen. Chicago was really the center of the universe for everything that wasn't Martin. Even Kalamazoo in Michigan, where the Gibsons were made, was just an hour drive from Chicago. Catalog sales were the internet of the day, and a lot of guitars were sold out of catalogs, most of them made in or around Chicago by companies like Harmony, Kay, Washburn, Regal. And Regal was one of the biggest. They made guitars for, if you ordered 6 or 7 units, they'd make one that said, Fred's Guitar Shop on it for you, and inlaid in pearl if you wanted. And they just sold a huge number of guitars. So we're going to look at these two and listen to them at this point in time. These were both made in the Regal factory in Chicago. The one Kenny has is 1939 Regal 12 fret. He's played this one a bunch. I probably should have switched off, so you gave this one to Eli this time, because it has a 12 fret dreadnought. And this particular one, we put a Martin T-bar in the neck. And it was born as a Hawaiian guitar, which many of the 12 fret later 30s were. So it was made to be played lap style, but we converted it to be a Spanish style guitar. It's a little bit deeper than a normal dread, and really one of the best sounding guitars with that configuration. Some of the early Martin dreadnoughts were 12 frets as well, as we talked about, and there's so few of them out there. They're really highly sought after, but the 12 fret, the scale of the guitar from the nut to the bridge is the same length, so it sinks the bridge farther down into the belly of the guitar and makes a more open sound. Norman Blake is a big advocate of 12 fret long scale guitars. He really likes the sound of that. So this one was made Regal 1939. The one Eli has, same year. It's labeled as a Washburn. Regal made it for Washburn. At that time, it was a company that was a wholesale distributor in Chicago called the Tonk Brothers, and I have a 1937 Tonk Brothers catalog that they sold everything from horns to cases to violins, and even were dealer in old Stradivarius violins in those days. That one was the extra super large auditorium size, which is kind of like a triple O or an OM size Martin, but a little deeper body. It's more of closer to a dreadnought size. It's not a model that really caught on. There's very few of those out there, but sounds pretty good actually. It's a 14 fret as opposed to this one being a 12 fret. And a lot of the radio stars had them. Some of them had Martins. Not all of them could afford them. And so the cheaper catalog guitars made by Regal and such were really popular for some of the radio performers. And then if you're a radio star, and we'll get into the next one of the really big groups that really helped the popularization of guitar itself were the Cowboy singers, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and we'll talk about some of the others. Gene Autry ordered a big fancy, really loud guitar, 12 fret dreadnought with all the pearl on it, D45. The first D45 ever made by Martin in 1933 was ordered for Gene Autry from the Chicago Music Company. If you ever get to Los Angeles, Gene Autry has a museum that he built down there, and his first and only D40, he turned down, I think Gene died 15, 20 years ago, but during his lifetime he turned down $1 million a number of times for that guitar, what the rule was. And it's proudly displayed. Martin has made a recreation of that first D45, but again, that was 1933. So we're still into the 30s with the radio folks being really popular, and these two made by a slightly lower Regal company for catalog sales and such.
I was here, quick story, I was here, I guess it was, I'm not sure when it was, 5 or 6 years ago, but Fretboard Journal was doing some videos, and I asked Jason, I said, y'all did an article about 2 consecutive serial number Washburn guitars pre-war, and I said, I want to meet that guy that owns those guitars. I'd seen it in their magazine, and Jason said, I can make that happen. The next day, come in, those guitars was sitting on the bed that we was taping in a hotel room up here, and got to meet Mark, and through that that day he brought this guitar along, and got to play this one. And I rarely ever step up try to buy a guitar, but I talk Mark Demeray blue in the face for about 3.5 hours and would not let go of this guitar, and he would not sell it, and it was just.
He wouldn't even take $1 million.
Well, I didn't have $1 million I wouldn't ever offer anything like that, but yeah, and but every time I come out here, I get to play this guitar. So I guess we'll do Cherokee Shuffle, I think. Yeah. You want to start?
I know.
Okay.
So one of the things about some of these guitars, particularly the Regals, that attracted me to them was some of these Martins up here are really worth more than a brand new large high-end SUV. So they're pretty expensive. You could mortgage your house and get them, which many people have done. This is pretty good sounding guitar. I got it on eBay for $250. And then we had to do a lot of work to get it up and running and stuff, and I guess you kind of have to know what to do to it. But some of the off-brands, Kenny has a couple of these. Kenny worked at Gallagher Guitar for many years and is a fine luthier in his own right. Many people don't know that. But it's if you know what to look for, some of these are pretty reasonably available and actually make pretty good guitars out there without mortgaging the house. So next we're going to talk about some of the, again, one of the things in radio that really made the guitar popular in our popular music. I don't know which of these you guys can switch off. You don't have to take the one I give you. You can trade if you like. Were the singing cowboys again. That really helped make the guitar rise to popularity in the 30s again, especially for the radio shows and stuff. And two of the perhaps lesser known movie star, but still in a lot of movies, the old RKO ones and on radio show, was a guy named Ray Whitley and Carson J. Robeson. You've all heard the song Back in the Saddle. Again, it was Gene Autry's theme song, and actually Carson Robeson wrote that song for him. The largest customer in terms of number of guitars sold for Gibson was the Montgomery Ward catalog folks. So they sold a ton of guitars at lower prices through the catalogs. And these two were sold, both of them out of the Montgomery Ward catalog and made in the Gibson factory in the 1939 range again. This is the Ray Whitley Recording King was their big name. When I grew up, Sears catalog had, Ted Williams and everything, and their name was Silvertone. The Recording King was the brand name for instruments of Montgomery Ward in their catalog. So these came out of Chicago, catalog sale guitars. And this one, the Recording King Ray Whitley that Kenny has, was almost exactly the same as a Gibson J35. When they first started making those in the late 30s, the model number 35 was the dollar amount, was the $35 guitar. And you could buy this one, which was very much the same guitar, out of the catalog for less. I think it was $22. So you could buy a Gibson, but have the different brand on it. Most people didn't know that, but the Gibson shipping ledgers are available. There's a big book where people wrote in each day what they were shipping out that day. And we found the shipping ledgers for both of this. I think this one was shipped in 1939 to the Kansas City Montgomery Ward. And that one, I can't remember now. I have my notes on it somewhere. But so the Carson J. Robeson that Eli has was really made from the rim mold of an arch top, we think. The next Gibson, that you won't see many like that jumbo size. The next one, really in the 50s, they came out with a guitar called the J185, which was the exact same rim mold. It looks the same. It's a little thinner body. The J185 had a slightly deeper body in the 50s. Well, many people think that J185 was one of the best guitars Gibson ever made. They're still highly sought after by collectors. But this was 1939 Montgomery Ward, and otherwise pretty similar to a J185 from the 50s. And then the Ray Whitley Recording King. So Cowboy guitars.
Do a tune there and wrote about Dan Miller, which he put out a magazine called Flat Picking Guitar. I don't know if any of y'all ever subscribed to that. I wrote this tune for his daughter. He has a daughter named Emily, and she was about, I guess, probably 5, years old at the time. And this one called Song for Emily. we got some of these. A lot of these had the Recording Kings had strap hardware that had. Most of them had a bracket there. Sometimes they're up at the top. Sometimes they're in between the keys here. But I always that's kind of like kind of, I don't know, case candy when you buy a guitar if it's got an old capo or some old picks in it. And for these, if if it has the hardware on it, especially this is kind of stuff that guitar collectors really we really love that. And it's actually has one here, so you got both sets here. Had a bracket here, and most of the time you saw those Cowboy kind of two-colored, twined around strap.
Drapery cord kind of stuff that you
Yeah.
could buy with it. The one Eli had, the Carson Robeson, also came with your initials. It came with a thing of letters, so you could put your initials on it. Mine has the stain there from where there were 3 initials from the kid who bought it, but the initials were gone at the end of the day.
I put mine on there. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.